Norm. Great to connect with you again and to talk a little bit more about invisible wounds, the emotional journey of a police officer's battle with PTSD. Every time I go back to the book, I find something new that I want to ask you about. And there's so much in the book that is rich and such great experiences being shared. And I'm just fascinated by this book. So I wonder if at the beginning of today's session, let's talk a little bit about what your goals were for the book. We chatted briefly last time about it, but I just wanted to remind everybody viewing, what were your goals for writing this book? Why did you do this project?
The original reason why, and it starts way back to my articles actually, it was actually initially to educate the general, like people from the general public. Because I think it's a career that is really misunderstood. I think, and for a reason. I mean, police organization, police agencies, or whatever you want to call them. I mean, it's known, even during my young days, it's known as kind of a secret society. I mean, and for a reason. I mean, we can't just go there and say, yeah, yesterday I arrested Rick Vaillancourt because he was pissed drunk driving his car. So we can't just go out there and say to your neighbor stuff like that. So we are kind of a very secretive, society or agency, and for a reason, like I said. And I think there's something that needs to be said out there to the general public, that even though we are secret, there is something that we can share, and that's something that I felt that I needed to share with the general public. Then it's up to the general public to do whatever they want with that information. But also on the second tier of it, I guess, in the background, I think my book also, like, if first responders, police officers, correctional officers, military, paramedics, firefighters, nurses, whatever, frontline workers, I think if they pick up the book, I think they'll see themselves in there. I think they'll realize that, you know what, I knew I wasn't alone, but now I read it that I'm not alone. And hopefully it'll help them make that step. If they're not seeing counseling yet, hopefully that book, after reading it, it'll encourage them to seek mental health counseling. And those two goals are basically the major reasons why I wrote the book.
Okay, good. I'm glad I asked you about that, because it's good to hear from that perspective. You dedicated your book to both your brothers and sisters in blue, I think is the way you worded it, and your family. Why?
Again, I guess for the brothers and sisters in blue is because I don't think there's a lot of police officers out there that are willing to open up like I did. And I'm not saying that to put myself on a pedestal, by far. It's a very difficult thing to do. And it was very difficult for me to do as well. I'm no different than anybody else. It's just, I took that, I guess, that step off the ledge, to, so to speak, to put myself, or another way of saying it, I guess, I just plunged in the cold water without knowing what the temperature was. I knew it was cold, but I didn't know. And at the end, you get used to the cold water, like anything else. If anybody has ever gone in seawater. So basically, I guess in a sense, I dedicated that to them because, in a way, I think it's because I try to represent everybody that wears a uniform in policing. And this is their word as well, because I know they're going through the same thing. For my family, because I know they went through a very difficult time during my dark years, where I was, refusing to believe that there was something wrong with me, trying to convince myself I was okay, and putting them through all that. So that to me is worth noting, as well as my forward, I guess, in the book, for the book.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. I understand. In the early parts of your book, you talk about your career interests, your career indecision, I guess, to some extent. You spoke about going to university, of course, and doing your degree. You talked about the idea of becoming a first responder or an RCMP officer, but there was a little bit of indecision, I guess, career-wise at that early stage in your life. And why did you, I'm sort of curious, I've been curious about this, Why were you interested in, at such a young age, in either of those professions, being a first responder or a police officer? What sparked that interest?
It's a good question. It's just a very difficult question to answer in the sense that I really don't know what drove me to that. I think it was just in me. Um, I know when I was growing up, I mean, where our farmhouse was, there was a sharp 90-degree turn. And every summer, of course, when I was growing up in the, from what I can remember, late 60s, early 70s during the muscle cars years. And basically, yeah, they would drive down a little too fast at times and just, there was an accident. And who would I see? Well, the RCMP police officer from the Shediac detachment come down, and of course I'd see the ambulance. But back then the ambulance wasn't like the paramedics today. It was St. John ambulance. There were volunteers. There was no paramedics at the time here in New Brunswick. Yeah, so that might have had something to do with that, because at an early age, we had, you know, those old farmhouses where you had a kind of a closed-in porch with all windows around, and we would sit there sometimes in the summer. Of course, you would see that. So that might have something to do with it. It could be something just in my DNA. For deciding the RCMP, of course, like I wrote in the book, to me, the RCMP at the time was, it was like getting drafted. If you got accepted, it was like getting drafted in the first round in the NHL, or getting drafted at all in the NHL base, because it's just an honor to be drafted in the highest professional hockey league. Well, for me, I saw the RCMP as, this is the best police force in the world. So getting accepted by them was great. But I wasn't too sure if I wanted to leave like the province, and I had approached actually the Moncton City Police at the time. There was a city police here in Moncton before they disbanded and the RCMP took over. And I had gone there to see if I could join their police force. And because I knew that they would, I had heard that they would pay for the training at the Atlantic Police College. And I thought, well, same thing. And I would get to stay closer to home and all that. But then when I got there, the recruiting officer just basically told me that, no, we don't pay anymore, because we found out that police officers were getting paid to go to training, that work a year or two in Moncton, then leave, and we'd lose all that money. So yeah, so that's when I said, no, RCMP is the way to go, and that's where I'm going to apply.
Okay. Okay.
To answer, yeah, to really answer, I don't know, but this is a little bit on how things unfolded, how I got to apply in the RCMP.
Sure. Would it be fair to say that you had a degree of respect, admiration for the policing profession at a fairly early stage?
They were, to me, of course, that's not the way I see now, but to me, when I was growing up as a kid, they were like gods. They were like the police officer. They were like, I guess they were like the Templars Knights, the Crusaders, you know, the stories behind and all that. They were like the ones that everybody admired. And so, yeah, it might have had something to do with that as well. Maybe there was some psychological not issue, I shouldn't say that, but psychological thinking behind it, that I crave to have that type of respect. Maybe, I don't know. So it could definitely have something to do with that. Absolutely.
From an education perspective, you and I actually pursued similar interests by doing business degrees. A business degree for a police officer. That's interesting. That intrigued me. I know that was a route you chose to go while you were waiting to get into the police force. Is it something you valued at the time, value now, value later in life? Did that business degree, did that education help you in your role?
It's kind of funny the way it started, because when I applied to the RCMP, or when I wanted to apply in the RCMP, when I graduated from high school, the sergeant at the local detachment told me that there was a freeze actually at the training academy from 82 to 84. They weren't accepting any recruits at all. So he told me, he gave me, I guess, a wise word of advice, is go get a degree, because he was seeing that after the freeze would, once training academy would open up again, he said that the rumor is that they'll be looking for candidates that have degrees, like university degrees. So I said, well, I might as well go to university then, because that wasn't the plan at all. I wanted to, join the RCMP as soon as I graduated from high school.
Yeah.
So I took business because I had a little bit of interest in it, but not that much, but because it had the reputation of being the easiest degree to get without a lot of effort in studying.
Okay.
But throughout the years, though, I actually found a passion towards HR. I branched off in management, a major in management, because that really interested me, the psychological way of how you manage people. And that actually did help me through my career, especially when I was a shift supervisor, how to deal with people from the general public, just the psychological reason behind it, just the management part of it. You could use that in everyday life, and even everyday life when I was working.
Mm.
Coaching hockey, I used that a lot, how to manage all these people. And yeah, for sure, that degree, I never thought it would, but it did actually help me. Not tremendously, but it did help me.
Yeah, that's
And
really interesting, because when you mentioned about your experience managing people, it's different from the traditional HR managing people in an organization. You're referring to managing people that you deal with on a day-to-day basis in policing, in coaching hockey. That's a really interesting application of your education. And it's like, I guess I'm going to back and ask you one final little question in this area. Regrets? Any regrets doing a business degree?
oh, absolutely not. No, that's something that I value a lot. Just even day to day today, because I even open up with my cousin, just a small agency to help hockey players if they want to pursue their careers on the education academic side of it, but keep playing hockey. We help them with the process of applying to prep schools or colleges or junior hockey teams in the States. Just that in itself, I use what I learned way back in the 80s. So you don't really lose that. You just, apply it to every day. But I apply it every day also, like in the Future Vision hockey business side. I actually apply it. I even applied actually with my book. What can I do to market this book? Because I did a minor in marketing as well. So I try to use those tools and try to read a lot on the new procedures or new marketing strategies to try to promote my book as much as possible. And podcast was part of it.
That's really interesting. It's a really great application, and a very different one than you traditionally hear of people that do a business degree. Changing gears a little bit, I want to talk a little bit more about what you did in your book to dispel the negative publicity, because I suspect you do describe it quite well. There was negative publicity and image of the police force, of police officers. Why was that important to you? Let's start off with that. Why was it important for you to work at dispelling any negative publicity?
I think some negative publicity is warranted. I'll start off with that, because policing business is, if I can call it that, it's like any other types of business or organizations or whatever you want to call it, like any place of work. We do have bad apples. As doctors, there are doctors that are useless, as there are lawyers that are useless and crooked. There are judges that are crooked as well. I mean, so in every profession, there are people that shouldn't be in that profession, and policing, it's no exception. There are some that slip through the cracks. But I think that we are getting I think we're kind of like the whipping boy of the press, and they are stirring things quite a lot, actually, and they are stirring emotions from the general public. And my book is kind of like trying to say, okay, they might have something there, but you know what? And I'm not saying this by far that every police action or every violent action for police is warranted, but I am saying this, and I truly believe this: unprocessed mental health issues from police officers it doesn't end well. And that's what you see in videos that are posted on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on TikTok, or whatever those social Instagram, Twitter, all those social media platforms. is that it's getting bad publicity because I don't think it's people really understand. When I hear comments like, how come the police officer didn't just shoot the gun off his hand? To me, it indicates at first, like when I was before I went seeing a psychologist, that would really get me going and get into a rage actually. But now I understand, the way I understand is that people really don't understand what's going on in the mind of a police officer when they're confronted with this type of situation. And that's what I'm attempting to do in my book, trying to explain this is actually what happens based from my perspective. Of course, not everybody thinks the same way, but I think if you'd be very surprised how similar the thought process is if you'd have 5 police officers from 5 different agencies facing the same situation. There might be a few things that are off or not the same, but when the end result, you'd probably get the same thing. And if you get all police officers with 5 years of service with about the same type of environment they have to work in, it'd be pretty close when they see that same scenario at the same time. I bet you when they talk about their experience, they would be very, very similar. So I think my book is based, I know it's a long answer, but my book is an attempt to try to educate the general public to say, this is really what's going on. And that's why I try to go a little bit deeper than just saying, this is the type of scene that I saw in this suicide. This is what I saw. I saw a decapitated head. Yeah, okay, that's fine. And it's very descriptive. I can go into details, from the very, still remember that. But how did that scene affect me? And how the 10 scenes similar to this affect me here? And how did that affect me in the job down the road, interacting with the public? And it did affect me. So I'm going to close that answer off by leaving it that way. And that's my attempt in the book.
Yeah. And it all comes back to what we said at the very beginning of this. Your goal of the book is to educate the general public. So it seems to resonate throughout your book. It doesn't seem, it does resonate throughout your whole book that that's what your goal is. And it's interesting how your illustrations really bring that out. A lot of your book looks at society's need to recognize mental health issues, and to use your words, and at least one, maybe 2 occasions in the book, I recall you saying about bringing those issues out of the closet, or words to that effect. What needs to be done, in your opinion, to bring discussions around mental health out of the closet?
When I said that, I think I might have to remind myself a little bit, or look at the book again. But when I spoke about that, it was mostly for police organizations for them to wake up. I think, like in the general public, it's a lot better. I think personally, I think it's a very openly spoken about in the police world. And I think, this, I might put my hand in the fire a little bit, but I think it's mostly like that in most first responders culture. I don't think police is any different than paramedics or firefighters in correctional officers or military in that sense. But I think if I think about it a little bit more,
mental health out of the closet, particularly in the police force, why is there that hesitance, that reticence, that feeling that you really can't discuss those things in the police force? And sort of, I didn't ask this yet, but it was sort of, it's in my mind for my next question, so I'll bring it up at the same time.
sure.
Do you feel that Invisible Wounds has become a first step in that process? Do you feel that what you've written about, your experiences, your perceptions, this bringing it out of the closet, the discussion about mental health in policing, is your book a first step to get that discussion rolling?
Absolutely. That to me is very important. It was very important for me to get it out there in the public. In a layman term, if you want to call it, I am kind of hoping that a police leader somewhere will pick up the book, read it, and say, you know what, this guy's right. We need to do more. We have good programs out there, so why are we still having suicides? I'll actually give you an example, an article that I read, and I can't, I'd have to research it again. I can't quote it, but I remember reading an article about suicides of police around the world, actually. And in North America, we're some of the highest in the world, actually, in suicides, for police suicide per capita. In Germany, for example, last year, there were 0 suicides of police officers. I
Wow.
should say last year, I should say in 2019 or 2018. When I read the article, it was the year before when I read the article. And I was pretty impressed with that. I'm going like, well, obviously they're doing something right. So how come we're not tapping into that? Another interesting and even closer to home stat was that the Los Angeles Police Department had, in the same year, had 0 suicide as well. Now they've had one, I think it's this year or last year, but they had 0 for a big police force like that probably has about the same amount of numbers, if not more, than the RCMP as a whole in Canada.
Wow.
So it's pretty impressive when you have stats like that, and then you're starting to dig in a little bit more. And the reason, well, one of the reason was that because they had psychologists actually riding along with police officers to get that connection with the police officers, to get that relationship with that police officer or police officers. So when they are in need, they don't feel as threatened by the psychologists that they're from an outside force, because now they're part of the police force. They're part of that culture. They're in there, they're observing police officers rolled around on the ground trying to arrest this guy that's high on drugs, but can't feel any pain. You know, they know. So police officers, they know, they've seen this. They know what's going on. They know that they're on their side now. They're not somebody trying to pick at their medical or mental health to try to lose their job. That's not what they're doing, the psychologists, but that's the perception we have, right? So by having the psychologist inside the car, and that's one way, I'm answering your question in the sense that that is one way to do it, is having actually active psychologists. Invest in that. Patrol with police officers, be part of the detachment or the force, not just being in an office in Moncton here, for example, and that's our psychologist for the RCMP. But if you never, you know, if you never ask for that service, you don't even know they're needed. You don't even, if you meet them on the street, you wouldn't even know them.
Is that an initiative you might see coming to the RCMP in Canada?
I would say in a dream world, I would love to see that. What I would like to see realistically is police agencies, including the RCMP, really take the bull by the horn and actually have mandatory psych session or mental health counseling sessions. I think it is needed now. If you want to break down the stigma or break down the culture, however you want to call it, like really give it a shock treatment, have that. And you want to grandfather it because you're afraid that the veterans, you know, will have, like, you'll have some pushbacks from the veterans. Grandfather it. Every time a new recruit comes in, this is the new policy. You have to go see a psychologist, you know, once every 2 or 3 or 4 months. To me, that's one way of breaking down the stigma or the culture, because now it becomes part of your culture that you have no choice. It's like going to see the doctor for a regular checkup. It becomes part of the conversation. It opens up a whole new window.
And it would probably remove that stigma.
It definitely, I truly believe it would. Because if I give an example, I think I gave that in the book, but if I give an example, if you and me, Rick, are colleagues, police officers, the way it is set up now, pretty good chance I won't go and say, Rick, you know what, I'm having mental health issues. I'm thinking about, you know, committing suicide. And right now, it's not like really solid or concrete thoughts, but the thought is going through my mind, and it's, you know, I'm afraid it might lead me down the road. I wouldn't have done that. But if you have mandatory psych session or mental health counseling, is that, you know what, Rick, you're my supervisor. Let's say, Rick, I need next Wednesday off. Oh, why? Oh, I need to go see the psychologist there. It's my 2 months is up or my 3 months is up and I need to go see them. You won't bat an eye, because you'll probably answer back going, yeah, I'm going 2 weeks from now. So, all right, well, good luck and hopefully it'll go well. And that's the end of it. It won't be like, Rick, I need to go see a psychologist. Really? Well, what's going on? Like, all of a sudden it's like a big, you're making it, not because you want to make it a big deal, because I think it's just a normal human reaction from that police organization, because it's still hidden a little too much. And it needs to come out a little bit more. And I think by having mandatory or even having psychologists, if they want to go that route, having psychologists ride along, great. That's another way of doing it.
Yeah, that's interesting. It reminds me of one of my favorite TV shows is a comedy, MASH, and the doctors in MASH used to have psychological assessments done on a regular basis by this guy. His name was Sydney, I recall. It's funny the things that you remember. And the doctors shunned it, but they seem to understand it. And it's almost like an analogy to what needs to happen in the police force. I mean, that show, goodness, MASH was what, in the 70s, 80s. So we're talking years and years ago. You brought up something really interesting, not a question, but an observation that I wanted to make. You talked about writing in, and your words were in layman's terms. That's one thing, and as I say, it's not a question, it's an observation at this junction. I just want to say very briefly before I forget, that your book is very much written in layman's terms. And I can say that as a layman. I don't understand policing. I haven't any experience in that area, but it's definitely written for laymen's and for police to easily be able to transfer those thought processes and everything to their own experiences and their own perspectives. So that's quite an accomplishment, I think, as well. The last time, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add another comment there. And I think the reason why I did it that way is because I really was putting a big effort for people to really understand.
Yeah.
And for me, just with, I could have thrown medical words in there, and I might have a few times here and there, but to me, it's like there's plenty of medical books out there. There's plenty of psychologists that have worked with police officers, first responders that have written books. And I've read some of them, and they're very good. I'm not downing them at all. It's just, I thought it was important to have a book written that was not from a medical perspective. It was from a real police officer's perspective, real, true, not skimming the surface, dig down deep inside and go all the way down to the other end of the earth, basically dig yourself down and through the earth and go to the other side.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, as usual, I'm going to change gears again. And I want to talk about something else in your book that we spoke about a little bit in the last session. It was the various titles for your chapters. And one of the ones last time, I'm trying to recall what we talked about, I think it was What is Wrong with Me? We spoke about in our last discussion. The other one that I'm sort of curious about is a chapter, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about the title, a little bit about the chapter as the final question for today. Camaraderie. What did camaraderie mean?
The camaraderie in policing, I think if you would have a military that had, and I had spoken to a military before because I worked with the military in the RCMP. They were in the military before. Actually, one of them I worked with while I was in Rishabakto had gone to Afghanistan and had done a tour there. And as an infantry, well, I don't know if it's infantry, but on the front lines there in Afghanistan. So he had quite some baggage when he came with the RCMP as well. But I think when you are faced with danger where your life is actually threatened on numerous occasions throughout your career, it kind of creates that bond. And I'll give you an example. I don't think I wrote this in the book, and this is just, I'm a very observant person. So I remember I had, because working in Rishabakto for our division here in New Brunswick is something that it's in a way, it's very unique because it's a very busy environment. It's a very violent, the people we deal with they can become very violent. And most of the time there are violent encounters. So the members from Rishabakto in general, when they went to other detachments, they had, just by walking in the door, they had this respect. Oh, you work in Rishabakto. You had this just unseen respect. And I remember I had been in Rishabakto for 8-9 years at the time, and going to a course in Fredericton at the headquarters. And I'm sitting there during lunch or break, whatever it was. We were sitting in the cafeteria when that was still open at the headquarters. And we were just shooting the shit and all that. And basically, one asked, "Oh, where are you working?" I said, Rishabakto. And all of a sudden, his face changed as soon as I said Rishabakto. And he said, "Oh, how long you been there?" I said, "I can't remember. It was like 8 or 9 years." And his face changed expression even more. And that's when I realized, like, holy geez, like, and then they just turned around. They kind of, it's almost like I don't know. I don't want to talk. Your first thing of all, you're working in Rishabakto. And second of all, you've been there for 8 years. You must be crazy. Basically, that's what it would come down to. So yeah, Rishabhakta, there was that pride of working there, and it's I'll leave it at that, I guess. But
Okay. Just coming back to the camaraderie part of it too. Like, what was the importance of camaraderie?
well, the importance of it was very. I mean, psychologically, I learned through my psychological sessions that it was extremely important
Mm.
because they act as a peer support group as well. And I remember having the after shifts after completing our 7 day stretch, and we always had this get together. Except the guys working, the members working graveyard shift, they had to, of course, keep answering the calls and all that. But for us, it was our last shift. We were done at, let's say, 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, and we always have what we call a choir boys practice. So we'd have, kind of a what we call, I don't know if we can use these words, but I assume we can. But we had bullshit sessions. We called them, not choir boys, but some people would understand the choir boys sessions. We call them bullshit sessions. So that's where we actually would dish out a lot of the health issues, mental health issues we had in our minds, not knowing that we were doing it. We were doing it subconsciously, but we were doing it. So we could have had really, really bad, let's say a bad suicide, that let's say the person shot themselves in the head, and it's not a pretty sight.
Sure.
Well, we would actually talk about that, but we wouldn't talk about it like I'm talking about it today. We would use our black humor. But psychologically speaking, that helped tremendously. And you can ask any psychologist about that. Our black humor, or dark humor, is very good for us, for our mental health, because it actually helps us process what we just saw in a different way, but it does work. I'm not saying that I would just go with that. I mean, you still need some psychological assessment and all that, but it did help us, because at one point we had a member, I'll say it, pull a stupid stunt, and the detachment commander put an end to all those sessions after our shift. And that's when I started, the psychologist in the Yukon pointed at that point, that specific point, where I started falling in my dark hole, where suicidal thoughts became a lot more stronger. Like the thoughts were stronger, getting stronger, because all of a sudden that camaraderie was there during the shift, but we didn't have that kind of little party at the end of our shift to celebrate that we're still in one piece, basically. So yes, that miss, and that's when everything started to unravel for me very quickly, actually, on the negative side.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question, but
yeah, it sure does. There's some really interesting points on camaraderie, on black humor, dark humor. And on that note, we're at the end of our time, but I'd really like to carry those discussions further into our next connection and talk a little bit about what that meant and what the impact was and the value of those types of choir boy sessions, I believe you referred to. So on that note, thank you again for the connection. Look forward to the next one, and we'll take it from there. Thanks, Norm.
thank you, Rick, for having me. Yeah, thank you for having me, Rick. It's always a pleasure, and I can't wait for the next one.
Until next time. Okay, so long.